On a single night in 1503, inside the very chambers where popes communed with God, a wedding feast spiraled into a spectacle so vile it would fracture the faith of millions. Inside the Vatican's Apostolic Palace, as October bled into November, an event unfolded that would sear the conscience of Christendom. Vaulted ceilings built to inspire awe looked down on a scene of utter degradation. Dozens of women, stripped of dignity and clothing, were forced to crawl on freezing marble. Princes of the church stood paralyzed, their horror a thicker presence than the incense in the air. And presiding over it all, enthroned and amused, was Pope Alexander VI. His smile was a blade. But this was merely the opening act. The true soul-crushing horror was reserved for the bride and groom, trapped in a ceremony that warped sacrament into sadism. This is the story of Lucrezia Borgia, a pawn in a family game where power was the only god. If the darkest corners of history compel you, subscribe to Shadow of History. For now, hit like, and as the tale unfolds, tell us in the comments where you're joining us from. In the fall of 1503, the bells of Rome carried a startling proclamation. The Pope's daughter, twice widowed under clouds of dark rumor, was to marry again. This union, however, would not be held in some distant estate. The ceremony was set for the Vatican itself, beneath sacred art meant to depict divine judgment. The chosen groom was Alfonso d'Este, heir to Ferrara's mighty duchy. To outsiders, this was a masterstroke of politics. To Alfonso, it felt like a death warrant. Lucrezia's past was a warning. Her first husband fled Rome, certain of assassins on his trail. Her second husband was strangled on Vatican steps, whispers naming her brother, Cesare Borgia, as the architect. Now another Alfonso was being tied to the Borgia web. His fear was a palpable thing. He tried every diplomatic art to escape, but Alexander VI was a man who accepted no refusal. His ultimatum to Ferrara was brutal in its simplicity: accept the marriage or face annihilation by Cesare's mercenaries and the spiritual death of excommunication. Faced with ruin, Alfonso's father commanded his son to journey to Rome and submit. Meanwhile, within her Vatican rooms, Lucrezia Borgia looked upon the eternal city with a weariness that aged her young face. Europe branded her a temptress and poisoner, but her reality was that of a captive. She was trapped between a father and a brother whose hunger for dominance had no ceiling. Her first marriage was voided the moment it became inconvenient. Her second husband, whom she truly loved, was butchered before her eyes. Attendants spoke of her midnight terrors, of waking gripped by a silent panic. She knew this third wedding promised no affection, yet she could not fathom the depths of the cruelty being planned just outside her door. A specific, calculated wickedness was coalescing in the palace shadows. The Vatican's master of ceremonies, Johann Burchard, felt this shift in the air. A veteran of Alexander's scandals, he sensed a line was about to be crossed, one history would stammer to record. A gilded cage was being prepared, and both bride and groom were walking blindly into its center. When Alfonso d'Este finally entered Rome, the city's ancient walls felt like the jaws of a beast. His welcome was a masterpiece of menace. Alexander sat in splendor, white and gold robes glowing. Beside him stood Cesare, a statue of controlled threat. His gaze, when it found Alfonso, conveyed a clear message: you are not a guest here, you are a possession. The following weeks were a lesson in humiliation disguised as hospitality. At feasts, Alfonso was seated with courtesans while clergy watched. On hunts, Cesare displayed lethal skill that felt like a promise. In conversation, the Pope made cheerful allusions to the tragic ends of Lucrezia's prior husbands. Every moment whispered the same truth: you belong to us. And the most infamous chapter had not yet been written. for Cesare Borgia was personally overseeing the wedding feast, and his plans ventured into territories that would shame the most decadent Roman emperors. Deep in the Vatican's underbelly, 50 of Rome's most accomplished courtesans were gathered. They were not common streetwalkers, but women of refinement and education. Selected for their beauty, they were brought through secret tunnels, their fear a sharp scent in the candlelit dark. They were dressed in exquisite gowns they would later be commanded to remove. Servants who saw this crossed themselves, murmuring prayers that seemed to die in the air. Lucrezia, sensing the gathering storm, fled to the Sistine Chapel the night before her wedding. Beneath the painted hand of God, she begged for any form of deliverance. Only silence answered. The divine felt absent. October 30th arrived with papal pomp. Lucrezia was adorned in a gown of gold-threaded silk, her hair a cascade of pearls. In the mirror she saw not a bride, but an offering. The ceremony in the chapel was a solemn farce, the cardinals' pious masks barely hiding their unease. Afterwards, guests flooded into the Borgia apartments. The feast began with standard grandeur, music, toasts, perfumed diplomacy. But as wine flowed, the atmosphere curdled. Alexander, growing boisterous, gave a nod to Cesare. The great doors sealed shut. Guards took their posts. Escape was impossible. Then the side doors opened. The 50 courtesans entered, magnificent in their gowns, their eyes wide with terror. A stunned silence gripped the hall. Pope Alexander rose, beaming, and declared the real festivities would now commence. At his command, the women began to disrobe, letting silks and velvets pool on the sacred marble. Cardinals turned away, making frantic signs of the cross. Some tried to leave, but found armed guards blocking their path. Alfonso sat immobile, his disgust plain. Lucrezia wept silently, her tears darkening the gold of her dress. Next, baskets of chestnuts were brought forth and scattered across the floor. The naked women were ordered onto their hands and knees to crawl between the legs of nobles and clergy, gathering the nuts like beasts in a grotesque harvest. The one who collected the most would win rich prizes from the papal coffers. Johann Burckhardt, recording it all, would later write that language failed him. The Pope and his son watched from a dais, laughing and wagering, as the spiritual heart of the Church was defiled. But the night's most intimate violation was still to come. As the wretched contest ended, a sobered Alexander issued a final decree. His voice cut through the drunken stupor. He announced that the marriage must be consummated, not in private, as tradition dictated, but here and now, before the assembled witnesses. And not merely once. To bind the alliance beyond all doubt, he demanded proof. 3 times. The hall plunged into a silence so deep the crackle of candles was deafening. Even Cesare seemed momentarily startled by this new apex of humiliation. Alfonso, pale as death, understood the unspoken threat in the eyes of the guards. He looked to Lucrezia. She was a shell, her spirit already retreated to some internal refuge. There was no choice. He led her into an adjoining chamber, its doors left deliberately open. What followed was not an act of union, but a public stripping of humanity. Witnesses stood frozen, some weeping, others praying in whispers. The courtesans themselves looked away, united in a shared degradation. When dawn's gray light finally touched the Vatican, it revealed a scene of devastation. Among the wreckage of the feast, 2 souls lay broken. Lucrezia stared vacantly at a ceiling she did not see. Alfonso trembled, face buried in his hands, shattered in a way no battlefield ever could achieve. He left Rome soon after, a man carrying a silence he would never break. The scandal erupted like a plague. Whispers became shouts. The Venetian envoy wrote it was a darkness surpassing ancient Rome's worst. The story became fuel for reformers like Martin Luther, a symbol of a corrupted Vatican. sacred walls witnessed the most profane of acts. Lucrezia would spend her remaining years in Ferrara, seeking redemption through patronage and piety, yet forever shadowed by that night. She died at 39, her last words a plea for a freedom life had denied her. Alexander VI died months later, rumors of poison circling his end. Cesare fell to an anonymous ambush, his body discarded. But the Knight of the Chestnuts and the triple consummation survived. When absolute power sheds its conscience, only horror remains. Burckhardt's hidden diary ensured the truth would outlive the lies. It stands as an eternal warning of the corruption that festers when morality is abandoned for power. If you have walked with us through this entire descent, type Borgia
in the comments below. And remember, the past is not a ghost, it is a lesson. If you want more journeys into history's darkest shadows, make sure you like this video and subscribe to Shadow of History.